Welcome to the Wellspring Digital Chat, where we interview marketing experts like the one I have today, and we bring their brains, not out of their head, but within their head, directly to you and try to break you off some knowledge. So today is Friday, and it's Ann Handley Day, and Ann is one of my most favorite marketers and one of my most favorite people. I quote her in just about every presentation I give. That royalty check is coming. I swear it's in the mail. But first, Ann, if you want to take a moment, introduce yourself, tell these people what you're all about.
So sure, I can do that. Hi, I'm Ann Handley, Chief Content Officer at MarketingProfs. I've written a few books on content, one called Content Rules with my good friend CC Chapman, and I'm the author of Everybody Writes, which is a go-to guide for creating ridiculously good content. Look at that visual aid right there. And yes, I'm delighted to be here.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned your books because I've read Everybody Writes and Content Rules are like my go-to when it comes to content. I read Content Rules while pacing the beach in Ocracoke. I'm going back in 2 weeks. I'm really excited about that. But yeah, so I was the freak going up and down the beach going, exactly, to myself, and people were looking at me strange, and I didn't care. And then I believe I read Everybody Writes mostly in the bathtub for some reason. So there's a water theme going on there. I don't know.
There's a water scene. That's interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for that visual, by the way.
You're welcome. You are quite welcome. You are quite welcome. Anyway, so thanks again for being here. Let's get to it. So first of all,
yes,
I consider you and Christopher S. Penn to be the masters of the email newsletter, both in your own right, both in your own unique way. Anarchy, your newsletter is just awesome. It's one of my favorites. So I have to ask, are newsletters still relevant today with stuff like this, the video podcast and regular podcasts and, all the different media out there? Are newsletters still getting through?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't see it as a binary choice either. I don't think that because email newsletters are still relevant, that live video or video of any kind or podcasts are not relevant.
Sure.
I think they can coexist beautifully. But yes, I absolutely do believe that email newsletters are, very much still should be in every marketer's quiver, I guess. And I really do believe in their power. The thing is, most brands, most companies, most people are doing them badly.
Yeah.
And so like when I think about the email newsletters that I subscribe to, I should say, I subscribe to a lot of brand newsletters, and the ones that I subscribe to that I love and recommend, I can probably count on one hand.
Yeah.
And so I think that my advice to companies of all sizes and stripes is always to, think about that email newsletter as an inherently unique and special opportunity. It's your ability to connect directly with someone in their space, in their inbox.
Yeah.
You own that list. You own the platform. You're not subject to the algorithm gods at Facebook or at Instagram. Like they're someone's choice to listen to you, to hear from you on a regular basis. That's gold, and I think that most brands are not really embracing that opportunity. They think of their email newsletters as a distribution strategy.
Right.
I talk about how most brands think about what they want to say. They think about the news part of a newsletter instead of focusing on the second part of that word, which is the letter. And why do I believe that's true? It's because, again, that's the unique ability to communicate directly with one person who has literally opted in to hear from you. So if we can think about that email newsletter as an inherently different kind of opportunity, I think that's rich.
That's interesting because most people think about social media as the place for where you can make that intimate contact with somebody, but you're right. Newsletters are really, I mean, it's a permission. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's a long-term nurturing tool,
Right.
essentially. And so, I mean, yes, I love social media. I think it's a great place to respond and engage with your customers, with your prospects, just to engage with your industry. But in terms of actually building those connections, solidifying those connections, and nurturing those prospects and customers long term, I think email newsletter is the way to go. And by the way, I don't think that it's only the email newsletter. I mean, I think
Sure.
a podcast like this, you own this channel, right? You actually own the data of the people who have subscribed to you. So anything that you can get people to subscribe to. But the reason why I believe so powerfully in email newsletters is because, I speak worldwide to marketers all across the planet. And when I survey an audience, remember when we used to have audiences that we could actually, speak to directly, look at them? That was a special time.
Let's think back for a moment.
The before times.
Yeah.
But when I ask them, how many of you have an email newsletter, almost every hand goes up in the room. And when I ask how many of you are proud of those email newsletters, I get,
smattering.
Yeah, smattering. So it's just, it's the reason why I talk about it so much is because of that, because almost everybody has one, and because most people aren't really thinking about it as deliberately as I think they should. But also the barrier to entry is very low. It's a little bit more difficult, I think, to produce a podcast, but it's very simple to sign up for an email platform. And so, if you're doing that perfectly well, then think about doing all of the other things. But I think an email newsletter is just a fantastic opportunity for most brands and most companies.
I saw Michael Barber give a talk on email marketing, and he used I don't know if it was an autoresponder or a reply to some guy that was just hounding you, and it was classic. I think he wrote a blog post about it too. But yeah.
The guy who, I've seen Michael talk about that.
Something about you being on parole or you going back to jail.
Right. It was one of those auto, that was a sales outreach, but it was those auto generated, email sequences where, a salesperson gets increasingly more desperate that they want you to respond to them. And somebody just sort of jokingly said, are you in jail? And I think that's like one of the options that you can pick in some of those sequencing programs, but I don't think he was writing it. And so I wrote back to him with this whole narrative about, I think I wrote from as the parole officer in the correctional facility.
It was great. Yeah, the audience was dying. It was
what's
fantastic.
Funny about that though? It's funny you brought that up because he never wrote back to me. So what a missed opportunity,
Totally. Exactly.
I think I actually asked them to send me a cake with a file in it or something.
Yeah, you did. You totally did. Yep. Yeah.
Come on.
Man, that's just rude.
Where's the love?
And sitting there rotting away in prison.
No kidding. Yeah, send me anything. A loaf of banana bread, something.
So, you tell a story about Cisco and Modelo, a Grupo Modelo, which kind of sounds like a Robert Redford film, but in your book, Everybody Writes, where you're really, the point of it all is to show people, show don't tell.
Right.
And so I was going to read the whole exchange here, but it's really long, so just get the book and read it. Trust me on this one. But can you maybe give these folks the Cliff's Notes version of this exchange, this idea of show don't tell?
Yeah. So you're talking about the Tim Washer piece? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. So yes, Tim Washer was playing a waiter in this exchange where he was playing a waiter with the Modelo. Was it the CTO? I should have read it before I got on the phone. It was embarrassing. Anyway, she was like a chief technologist, as I recall, from
something like that. Yeah,
from Modelo. Yeah. And so it became this, he was the overly friendly waiter, and he is waiting on her, and they ended up having this whole conversation about technology and infrastructure and supply chains and all of these things. And the reason why that was so effective was because, first of all, it's Tim Washer. Honestly, anything the guy does is brilliant. He's hilarious. Right. So, and I call him the B2B marketing's answer to Stephen Colbert, because he's just so funny. but in a very real and soulful way, which is why I loved him so much. But the reason why that particular video series that he did was so effective, I think, is because he had real people, first of all, talking about real issues, and it was very compelling. Think about a producing a scripted video with a CTO in which she's engaging in a humorous kind of way with Tim or anybody really, as opposed to, just like a one sheet of the specs of this particular technology, and so
corporate
it's a great
jargon.
Yeah, very jargony, right? And so it's a great example, I think, of showing the power of the technology that Modelo was using to get their beverages into various establishments, number one. Number two, it was a great example of actually having an executive on camera, just interacting with Tim in a very fun and accessible way. It gave me a very different impression of the company.
Sure.
And number three, it was an effective use of humor, right? And so many companies sort of shy away from humor. And humor applied in a very unlikely place, right? In terms of talking about B2B technology. So that's why I really enjoyed that so much.
Yeah, that was a great little, it's an important lesson too. So,
for sure.
So you devote an entire chapter in Everybody Writes to empathy.
Yeah.
In the quote I use of yours, you say to be relentlessly customer focused. Life could be so much better for all of us if more corporations adopted this approach. And, maybe I'm a cynic, but it just doesn't seem to want to happen. But if the corporations were sitting here watching you, could you maybe preach to them a little bit on the importance of empathy?
Yeah. I think empathy gets shortchanged sometimes because we think of it as something that is, I don't know, just is you either have or you don't. But I actually think of it as more of a practice. So when I think about empathy in terms of a business or a marketing context, it's essentially putting the needs and the wants and the desires and the heart of your customer front and center. In marketing, we talk a lot about putting the customer at the center of your marketing, customer-centric marketing. We talk about it all the time. But I don't think it's effective unless you really go beyond just thinking about the customer and thinking about, peering inside of them a little bit, walking around in their shoes a little bit, and trying to understand how is it that we fit into the context of their lives. Empathy does not mean sympathy. It doesn't mean that you feel what they feel. Instead, it just means that you think about how is this going to land with a customer? What would my response be? Try to put yourself in the customer's shoes. It's very much what I do in writing, right? I write what I want to write. I have something I want to say, so I say it. But then I always go back to it, and in the editing phase, I talk about swapping places with the reader, thinking about things from the reader's point of view. And I think that exercise is the exact same exercise that we need to do as marketers in marketing. Whether you are a massive tech B2B company, education, hospital, it doesn't matter, anything. Or whether you're a small business or a sole proprietor, I think it applies across the board.
Absolutely. You read so many corporate blogs and you can tell that they skip that second step of going back through.
And I get it. Yeah, we love to talk about ourselves, and I totally get it because I get excited about, what I'm doing or what I'm working on or what I'm developing or producing. Like, we get excited about it, and I get it. But it's incumbent on us to then take it to the next step and say, okay, we're excited about this. So why does it matter to somebody else? I talk about going through that so what exercise. Well, so what? Why should somebody care? I think so much of our marketing and so much of our world, honestly, would be so much better if we just went to that.
Amen.
Yeah.
Preach on.
Preach on.
So just to get a little topical here, in a recent post from your blog titled "Why Brand Voice Matters in a Time of Social Crisis," you talk about how brands respond to crises and whether, good or bad. It's definitely worth a read. But there was one little piece in there yeah, it's always like that one little line that catches me, that I just absolutely love. And the line was, write a picture. And I read that. I was like, oh man, that says so much in just 3 words. So I wondered if maybe you could explain this concept a bit and, talk a bit about its importance, especially today in the mess
Yeah.
that we're in.
Yeah. Writing a picture in terms of framing your product or your service in the, again, in the eye of your customer. Why should they
Right.
care? I talk a lot about just the need to make things a little bit more visceral, make
Hmm.
make somebody feel something. And so that's really what writing a picture is. It's not just telling somebody. It's kind of like the situation we were talking about a second ago with, Tim Washer and Group Modelo, right? It would have been one thing for them just to say what's what, but instead, producing a video was one way to really make that idea come alive. And I think the very same thing is true in using your voice and writing. Um, just make it come alive, describe a situation, make your customer the hero, talk about how is it that your product or your service lives in the world. And I think if you can shift your marketing to that place, it becomes inherently more alive and more visceral.
And that's the biggest complaint I hear from marketing directors or clients that we work with is I don't know how to connect with the client. I don't know how to, I don't think our blogs are being read, or, and I think that's the point. They're missing that point of that connection and creating that, that human experience for them. So
Yes.
that's great. Write a picture. I'm gonna get that tattooed on my forehead.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I like that. And then you can be reminded every morning when you wake up. And
I'd have to write it backwards though.
true.
That would confuse people. Anyway, I don't know. So I saw a picture.
Tactics to talk about here.
Yeah. So I saw a picture of you and Mark Schaefer out to dinner, and I'm a little bitter that you didn't fly me in, but that's okay. I understand. We're
You
in
didn't
a.
answer the text. That's what happened.
That's what it was.
Do you
Okay.
remember?
Ah, damn it! Every time I gotta check my. That's another thing I should tattoo to my forehead. So you and Mark are both big advocates of the humanization of marketing, and Matthew Sweezy's out there preaching the context marketing revolution. Mark's talking about a marketing rebellion. So what am I getting at here? What can a marketing director put this? How can they put all this to good use when they're constantly just trying to prove their worth to their boss, or improve the bottom line, or show ROI? How can they look at this and go, how do I make this a reality? How do I actually humanize our marketing efforts? I know that's a big question.
Yeah, I know. I mean, start with your customers. I mean, that's really ultimately what humanizing your marketing means. And I think it's especially so important right now, in this era where we are all on Zoom all the time.
Mm,
We're working out of our home offices. We are all sort of grounded in a way and behind screens constantly. And so I think it's so important now to actually, to rely on your customers to show the face of your company, but also turn the camera around and show
yeah.
who you are. One of my favorite examples recently, and I think it's a big company and it's human and it's exactly the kind of thing that Matthew and Mark and I talk about, is that came from Marriott. So Arne Sorensen, CEO of Marriott, at the very beginning of this whole coronavirus shutdown, Marriott obviously hit super hard.
Sure.
Because, almost like overnight, all of their hotels were just like gone, right, just shut down.
Yep.
And so they had to furlough a lot of their staff, a lot of their associates. And so every other brand in the world, almost every other brand in the world, issued press release or a letter or something, some statement.
Right.
And they wrote it and it came from PR, and it just feels very different, right? It's very like, here's what we're doing. Yes, they use the word unprecedented, probably, it's, in these times, those kinds of that kind of phrasing. what Marriott did, and again, this speaks to the work of what I think the best marketers are doing in terms of leading that revolution and humanizing and empathy and all this kind of stuff, is that Arnie Sorensen got on camera again, turning the camera around, and he spoke directly into the camera, spoke directly to their shareholders, their associates, and he just talked about the incredible changes that were coming about within his own company. And about Marriott's response to it and how he felt. Why it was so beautiful is like, yes, of course, PR gave him talking points, and
Sure.
he had all of that, but it was Arnie. It
Right.
was so well done because he got emotional. He felt like you could feel his, you could really feel his emotion behind it, and you could just feel how he was reeling. He was kind of devastated, and I really appreciated that message so much. And I think of that often because, here it is now months later, but that message stuck with me in a way that no other brand message in response to coronavirus did.
Sure.
Why is that? It's because I felt something there. And so it's kind of that simple, right? And I guess it kind of encapsulates a lot of what we're talking about here. But that is where you should start. Think about telling the story of your customers, talking about them specifically, highlighting them, showing what's going on in their worlds. And I think there's a couple of examples of brands who have done that throughout this. But also, your executives, the people who are running your company, turn the camera around, show who you are, speak directly to the people who you want to connect with.
I've seen a lot more of that locally than I have on the national stage, where, locally, local business leaders are stepping up to the plate and speaking from the heart. And I think, yeah, it absolutely is a different message and more effective for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, very different. And I think your language becomes different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think I haven't seen a lot of it, not even at my local level. So maybe I should just move to your world because it sounds like an inherently more empathetic place to be.
It's a lovely place. It's beautiful. It's idyllic. There are mountains and streams and children running in the meadows. It's lovely. Highly recommend a visit. All right. So I saved the best for last. I have to ask, and I know you're excited about this. Billy Beane. You are interviewing Billy Beane. And for those of you who don't know who Billy Beane is the guy that Brad Pitt played in Moneyball.
Yeah.
And he is also really, I don't know if he's the father of big data by any stretch of the imagination, but he's certainly popularized the idea of big data. Because he used it to win a lot of games.
Right.
So when we're talking about, big data these days, and I'm not somebody who really can say that I'm a big data guy. I'm not a data guy. I'm not a details guy. So talking to someone like me, how can I still make use of big data, even though I'm not the one like a Chris Penn who's going to do a deep dive into, analytics and data and all that? How do I make good use of all that big data, in your opinion?
Yeah. One of the things that I really appreciate about what Billy Beane did was that he didn't look at the data that everybody else was looking at, right? When he turned things around for his organization, he looked beyond the data points that every other manager in his space was looking at. So he wasn't looking at vanity metrics. I guess the equivalent in marketing would be vanity metrics, right? He wasn't looking at the number of, and I'm speaking metaphorically here, Facebook followers or Twitter followers, or he wasn't looking at things that ultimately don't really translate into business success. And so really what he did is, again, metaphorically, looked at email subscribers, the number of those email subscribers who actually become paying customers.
Right.
He found those data points that actually matter consistently to the business.
Right.
And then he was able to, find those players and plug them into those roles in a way that I think just made an immense difference for his organization, right? That's what Moneyball is about. And that's how you get to have somebody like Brad Pitt play you in a movie.
That's what you have to do.
Yeah. So in terms of like how that translates to marketing, though, just find those more critical bits of data that are more important to you and your business and your organization. That's essentially what he did. We started this conversation today talking about email, and if you're wondering where do I start, I would look there. Look at your email list, look at your database, figure out. Probably those are your most engaged, your customers to focus on. So start there, tease out the important metrics there.
And if you want some great examples of some different ways to handle email marketing, I already mentioned Anarchy, which is available at annhandley.com, but also the MarketingProfs newsletter.
Yeah.
I love it. I use that as an example in a lot of the talks that I give. As a great way to handle email marketing. So I
Awesome.
think, yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I will let the marketers on our team know. They'd be very happy to hear that.
Virtual hug from me. So, well, that is the end of the interview. And Ann, I absolutely appreciate you being here and coming on to do this. It is always wonderful to see you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really happy that we were able to do this, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Bye, everybody.